Listen to last night's debate. You heard a certain term that was used over and over several times. And so Gio is asking, given all this political talk, what exactly is a tariff? Well, here is Victor Puente with the answer to that good question.
Well, tariff is basically a fancy word for a tax added to items that are imported into a country from somewhere else. That cost is paid for by the company importing that good or product, and generally that cost is then passed on to consumers. There are several reasons a tariff might be added to products. First, the government might be trying to protect domestic industries. By making foreign goods more expensive, consumers may purchase items made in their home country. Tariffs can also be used to raise money. That tax or fee is paid to the government. And a tariff can also be a political tool. They can go both ways. In 2018, then President Donald Trump added a tariff to EU-produced steel and aluminum. In retaliation, the EU taxed some popular American products like Harley-Davidson motorcycles, peanut butter, and bourbon. Bourbon manufacturers said the 25% tariff led to a drop in sales in Europe. That tariff was removed in 2021 after the EU and U.S. came to an agreement. If you have a good question, just email us. Goodquestion@WKYT.com. I'll see you WKYT Mornings.